Hi, welcome back to Storytime with Dave Booker. Today we're continuing on with our readings from Time Is. We're going to start with Cloud and Sunshine. We're going to do two chapters today. The first one is just a couple of pages, just kind of the intro. And their next trip, they're going to Philadelphia, about 1775. So I think we're going to do these two chapters today. We'll do the second half of the Philadelphia trip, and I think I'm going to cut it off there. If you want to hear more, you got to let me know. Leave comments in the comment section and let me know to keep going. Otherwise, we're going to go to Time Is, Time Was, but we may have to do the last chapter of this book just to kind of get you before when Don and Honey meet. And then they find out that, well, okay, we'll decide that in a minute. But I'm ready. Are you ready? I've got my oolong tea. I've got my book here. So I think I'm ready to go. Let's get started. It had rained while we were away, and the ground was soggy. As I sank up to the calf of my shoes, I thought how much the weather matched my mood. I'd really been enjoying these trips with Scott and didn't want them to end. I got to my truck, kicked the mud off, and drove into town. I stopped off at the office bar on the way. It's called the office, so if anyone asks where you were, you can tell them you were at the office instead of at the bar. Kind of sounds better. I grabbed a bottle of Jameson's Irish whiskey and went up to the apartment. I spent the rest of the night watching football, the late show, and drinking. Next morning I had a headache, and my tongue felt like it was run over by my muddy tires. I downed a couple of aspirins and went out to see Scott. I was too upset to get anything to eat and much too worried to pick up something for the both of us. I was really hoping he hadn't done anything drastic during the night. I had drunk enough last night to keep me inside and not messing things up by going out to him. Well, time would tell. I rolled up and made a slam-bang exit for the truck. I tripped on the curb and fell face first into the mud, but I didn't care. I jumped up and ran as fast as I could up to the lab. I leapt in and slammed the door. Scott leaped up from his desk and rolled around, caught the side of me, and started laughing. "Don, what the hell have you done to yourself?" He threw me a towel and pointed to the sink. "Get yourself cleaned up and then we can talk." He picked up the phone and called in a breakfast to be brought out to us. There's a little biscuit diner nearby. We'd stopped there a few times, and they brought food out to us when we were busy. By the time I was presentable, breakfast had arrived, and I was ready for it. I was also relieved that everything was still intact. We sat down at a folding table between our desks and ate, and more importantly, talked. Don, as you has obviously noticed, the temporal correlation vector transport device is still viable. I relaxed at that and continued to eat as he went on. Our primary error has not been in adequately researching our destinations and times to ensure proper security and safety. From now on, we shall pick times when nothing of note, at least disaster-wise, occurs. I thought about that, and it seemed to me that we'd be a lot safer this way, but sounds good to me, I agreed, but I thought this might take a little bit of the fun out of it. Scott noticed my silence after a while. Don, I agree that whatever happened in the past was inevitable. While we were the cause of several regrettable happenstances, they happened and were bound to happen, so there's no reason to fret over it. I gathered up the paper plates and tossed them into the trash. I walked over to the rack of outfits, looked over my shoulder, and asked which ones we would need. Scott seemed amused at my eagerness. "Well, let's work that out first." He sat at his desk and dragged my chair over. I've always had a predilection towards the 1700s, more specifically the time when our country was being born. I brought out the atlas and looked up Philadelphia around where Independence Hall was. Well, it looks like a good park behind Independence Hall was there then. It might be a good jumping off point. "Agreed," Scott exclaims. He went back to his computer to get coordinates. As to a year, let's try 1775 when things were seriously beginning to happen. I offered. Scott nodded and punched in year and time. As he did so, I went to the racks for suitable attire. He had acquired more costumes somehow, or else unpacked ones I hadn't seen before. Scott donned his outfit and I put on mine. He opened a large chest and took out some leather bags. We'll have to use silver money as paper was just starting and hadn't much value. We can use British coins from the time and exchange them at a bank for currency, relevant to the time and place, since each locality had their own currency. We checked each other's return units, now converted into belts, put the pouches in our pocket, and walked out of the lab into an early morning rain of 1775. I beg your pardon, I better get some juice here. Oh, that's better. Okay. The quote on here is from Ben Franklin. It says, "Does thou love life? Then do not squander time, for that's the stuff life is made of. Lost time is never found again." The warm rain dripping off our hats added to the pools of water at our feet. Day was just dawning, and the red-hued clouds were slowly breaking apart as we stood under a sheltering chestnut tree to get our bearings. Suddenly occurred to us that we had arrived without a definite plan in mind or for our visit. "Don, what do you say to a sightseeing trip this time?" He looked at me expectantly. I looked around and back to Scott. "Sounds good to me. Let's pick a direction and start walking." What happened next was pure Laurel and Hardy. We each took hold of the other's arm and headed in opposite directions, then switched directions, and finally ended up bumping into each other. I looked up at Scott. "You pick." He took hold of my elbow and started walking us away from the rear of Independence Hall. The weather was wet but warm, and it didn't take long for the rain to stop altogether. There weren't many people out yet. The streets were quiet, filthy, and littered with a wide assortment of trash. We passed a long, low building with bars on the windows. I figured it was some sort of jail or confinement building. As we walked by, several cups attached to sticks were thrust at us through the bars. We did our best to ignore them and were pelted with apple cores and crusts of bread. We stepped a bit faster after that. Walking further, we passed a bank, but it seemed it would be a while before it opened. We continued down South 5th Street for a while, then turned left towards the river. There were many halls or meeting buildings along this road, as well as more than a few insurance buildings. We turned left again and went north, but I couldn't find a street name. Here were several grand hotels, several more halls, shops, and quite a few pubs. We stopped in one of the hotels and sat in the lobby to figure out what we wanted to see and do. I'd like to go to Independence Hall for a while. I know we can't watch the delegates at work, but maybe we could go to the second floor and hear a bit of what's going on, I offered. Scott looked thoughtful. "I see no difficulty in that, and it should be most informative." "Don," he continued, "I've been thinking. If you have nothing on for the next day or so, we could stay longer than the few hours we have been taking for our sojourns." I hesitated a moment. "Sounds great, but are you sure we should? I mean, isn't that taking an unnecessary risk?" I winced when I saw the look on Scott's face. Held a hand. "I know there isn't any risk. Sorry I brought it up." Scott smiled and beckoned me up to the counter. He ordered 2 rooms, and we paid £1 a night each for them. Scott paid 2 shillings 6 pence for a checkerboard they were selling near the desk. We went up to inspect our rooms. Mine had a large bed with 4 posts going up. A fireplace was recessed in the wall next to a pitcher of water sitting in a bowl on a pedestal. On the far wall was a wardrobe with drawers and a door section to hang up clothes. The bed was comfortable and seemed to be filled with feathers. Oil lamps hung from the wall, and a small rug covered part of the floor. All in all, it looked like a very comfortable place to spend the night. I did notice a small pot under the bed, which I recalled as a chamber pot, and a very small tub I wasn't immediately sure about. I had him knock at my door, and Scott was standing there with a chamber pot of his own in his hand. "Do they really expect me to do my business in this thing?" I stifled a laugh and pointed to the privy outside that would serve as an alternative. Oops, sorry, oh Lord, hold on 1 second. The computer decided that it's going to skip over everything. Sorry, I'm back in London now. Okay, there's the Sphinx one. There's the one we just did. Okay. Uh, he stepped into my room and pointed to the small bath. What the hell did they expect us to do with these? Suddenly memory stirred up a recollection I had read about years ago. They're called hit baths. They're filled with water and your legs and most of your torso stick out. Christ, when will they invent a decent tub? I pat him on the shoulder. It's not only for a few days and no worse than taking a sink bath. We went downstairs to the lobby and stood looking up at the street. A stout but distinguished-looking gentleman entered and quickly strode past us to the desk. Is there any mail for me today? He asked the clerk. Sorry, Mr. Hopkins, there's nothing. He stormed out without another word. I was standing there with my mouth open. That was Stephen Hopkins, I blurted out. I've been accustomed to seeing these famous people through the film 1776, and nothing could have been further from the real man. I wondered how many of these other great men we might pass and never recognize. I'd been accustomed to seeing these to do. Scott brought out his checker set, and we played a couple of games, drank coffee, and munched a few buns. After I beat him 5 games out of 7, Scott suddenly decided it would be a good time to wander back to Independence Hall. By the way, it is known as the Philadelphia State House here in 1775, so... It was almost noon by the time we got back, and there was a steady stream of people in and out of the building. Luckily, there was no problem getting in and going upstairs. The second floor was where state business went on. There were offices and desks and a long hall with a fireplace at the end. On either side were settles and spittoons. People were milling about, some looking through the windows, while others were writing notes. There were writing tables with paper and quill, pens and ink, bottles everywhere. We listened as people talked about the fighting in Lexington and Concord in April. As I listened, something like an idea was starting to take form. Something important was supposed to happen in June, but I couldn't remember what. The Battle of Bunker Hill. Scott, I hissed. This is a chance to test something. I was remembering that America had lost the battle. What if we go to Boston and do something to help America win? Scott looked sadly at me. I agree with the temptation is strong, but there's a problem with your suggestion. America didn't win. America didn't win this engagement, so either we didn't assist or our assistance was of no account. I know, but don't you think we could try? So far, we have not tried to intentionally change anything. Now, you said yourself that, how'd you put it? Supposition without testing is merely an idea. Scott rested his head to his chest and thought for so long that I wondered if he had fallen asleep. Eventually he turned back towards me. Don, this is something that requires careful consideration. To now, our actions have been unintentional and, as we have noted, have fulfilled to some measure events already established. Now you are asking to purposely change events that, if successful, which I seriously have doubts on, would affect not only ourselves, but could change, add, or even eliminate many lives. He paced up and down the length of the hall. After about 20 circuits, he returned to his seat next to me. I fear that what you request is not something I can be in accordance with. If, at a later time, we can find a more suitable and subtle test with minimal risk, we may try it. In the meantime, let us continue our visit. As we walked down the stairs, we saw an elderly gentleman walking out the door. He looked like Ben Franklin from the side. We continued to walk behind him down the street. Suddenly he turned about and I saw him full face. I stopped very suddenly, grabbed Scott's sleeve, and I whispered in his ears, "That's Ben Franklin!" Scott gasped, put his hand to his mouth, and looked at me with wide eyes. His body slowly swayed from side to side. He put his trembling arm around my shoulders and loudly whispered in my ear, "Duh! Come on, let's go see where he's going." We kept our distance behind him, changing to the other side of the street from time to time. Kind of felt like we were Pinkerton detectives. I'm ashamed to say it, but I started humming the old Peter Gunn theme, da 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 da. Yeah, I know I can be pretty immature sometimes. Scott smacked me on the back of my head. We walked a little faster as Mr. Franklin seemed to be slowing down. He stopped at a large house with a small sign above. The paint on the sign was so faded that we couldn't read what it was. Scott walked up to the door after Mr. Franklin entered and knocked. A doorman in a sort of dress suit opened and ushered us both inside. "The parlor is on the left, gentlemen." He waved us towards the door. The air was strong with the scent of flowers from vases in the hallway. Dark oak paneled the walls and candles lit the way. The passage was about 40 feet long, and as we approached, the sound of a piano and a couple singing met our ears. I looked up at Scott, and he had a puzzled look on his face. "We must be crashing a party." "Come on." Perhaps we ought to leave. I shook my head and smiled. "I don't think this is that kind of party." "Come on." My hand shook with excitement as I opened the door. The smell of flowers and perfume was strong as the door opened, but the first thing to meet our eyes was Ben Franklin and a very pretty young lady singing at the piano. He smiled as we walked in. Two of the ladies who were grouped around greeted us and escorted us to a long couch. I glanced over at Scott, and his face was red to the top of his bald head. Once seated, I felt soft hair brushing my face as she whispered in my ear, "My name is Deirdre." Her warm breath sent goosebumps through me. "I'm Don, and this is my friend Scott." I told her as I placed my arm around her waist. She wasn't wearing a corset and sure didn't need it. Scott's complexion was returning normal as he talked to his escort. She was stroking his head and whispering in his ear. Ben and his companion sat down and were engaged in earnest discussion. The piano player was playing a quiet melody in the piano, and I asked Deirdre what it was. She looked at me surprised and told me it was called The Bells of Aberdovey. She went over to the piano and told the player to wait a minute and then began again. She returned with a copy of the sheet music with her. After the intro, we all began to sing. Now, this is just between you and me. I have been trying to find the music for these. I don't have it. Besides that, my singing voice is not the greatest. So I'm going to just read these songs to you. If you can find them, look it up, put it on YouTube. You can download it onto my site, and I would love to hear it. But this is the lyrics to The Bells of Aberdovey. "If to me as true thou art as I am true to thee, sweetheart, we'll hear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from the bells of Aberdovey. Hear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from the bells of Aberdovey." There was quite a bit more, and it's a very lovely song. If you have never heard it, you've got to find it. Deirdre and Martha provided the alto voice. I provided the tenor, and Scott turned out to be a bass, or very deep bass. By the time we got through to the third stanza, Ben Franklin and his companion joined us as well. He was bass too, though not as low as Scott. I must admit it sounded thrilling, though I'm not the best of singers. Ben introduced himself to us and introduced his companion as Mariana. He excused himself for a moment and returned with wine and glasses for everyone. Then he went to the pianist and presented him with a few coins and asked him to play The Lass of Richmond Hill. I asked Deirdre if she had the music. "You don't know many songs, do you?" she joked as she went to the piano. When she returned, the pianist started again. "On Richmond Hill there lives a lass, more bright than May day morn, whose charms all other maids surpass, such rose without a thorn." And the chorus is, "Sweet lass of Richmond Hill, sweet lass of Richmond Hill, I crowns resign to call thee mine, sweet lass of Richmond Hill." And of course there's a lot more, and we sang it twice since it sounds so good. The rest of the evening was spent drinking, singing, and in embraces. Not the way you would usually spend an evening in a brothel, but it still was thoroughly enjoyable. Found out later that Mr. Franklin had paid to close the place up for us. We gave our companions as much money as Ben did to his, quite a bit, as he is very generous, and walked together to the exit. "You are gentlemen of discernment and sophistication. You can tell by the manner in which you treated your companions this evening. I greatly enjoyed your company, and if ever you feel so inclined, I would be proud to join you sometime for dinner." We bowed and Ben Franklin took his leave of us. Scott looked mellower than I have ever seen him. You know, Don, I'm glad the evening turned out the way it did. I agreed and we walked back to the hotel. Don and I, or Scott and I had a final beer in the hotel lobby and played a few rounds of checkers. The fireplace was burning low, but still gave off warmth. Scott stretched his long legs towards the fire and stared into the fire. I was starting to doze off when Scott tapped me on the shoulder. Off to bed, old lad. See you in the morning. Who are you calling old? I countered. I'm about 20 years or more younger than Scott, but we have so much in common that it doesn't matter. I stood and stretched and followed him up to our rooms. Good night, old fellow, I called as I entered my room. Watch out who you're calling old. Oh, wait, that's right, he mumbled as he shut his door. The fireplace in my room was still going. The light cast flickering shadows over everything, and it was very relaxing. A large water jug was resting to the side of the fireplace, and the water was just above warm. I filled the bath and sponged myself, and afterwards I washed my, shall we say, linen, and hung it in front of the fire to dry. I wrapped myself in a throw, lying across the bed, and dragged the chair in front of the fire to reminisce over the day's events. I knew Scott was having trouble going straight to sleep, as I could hear his footsteps pacing back and forth. I must have sat there for an hour because I heard the bell tower chime 11. Time, I thought, to get some sleep. Clambered into the bed, which was very much higher than I expected, wriggled deep into the sheets and blankets, and went quickly to sleep. And the next chapter is called Meanderings, and that one, again, is going to be a nice long chapter. So I think we'll do that one next time. So I hope you'll be back to listen in. And we're going to go through the entire Philadelphia trip. And the Philadelphia trip kind of leads into the next trip, which takes him to see Lincoln when he was still in New Salem as a very young man before he got into politics and all sorts of stuff. So I'm kind of tempted to go to that one and read that one as well, but we'll see. So that was the beginning of their Philadelphia trip. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you'll be around for our next reading. And as always, please leave comments. Let me know how you like these. If you don't like these, let me know that too. I can take construction criticism as long as it's positive. So have a good day, and I look forward to seeing you again on our next reading. And I can't see because I don't have a glasses on.